all cutthroat on the Western Front. The deep-rooted history of betrayal in Western intercollegiate athletics originated 100 years ago in the little-known Pacific Northwest Intercollegiate Conference, when the larger schools, many of whom held dual membership in the Pacific Coast Conference, would withdraw from the PNIC, leaving the smaller schools behind. That rebellious streak was renewed in the demise of the Pacific Coast Conference in the late 1950s, when the PCC would disband, while Washington and the California Four would leave their conference mates behind to form the AAWU, or the Big Five, in what is today known as the Pac-12. That tactic would be replicated a few years later by schools in the Skyline Conference, when the top schools would leave their conference mates, Utah State, Colorado State, and Montana, for dead, and the Skyline would dissolve, as the top schools would hook up with the Arizona schools and form the Western Athletic Conference, the WAC. A generation later, the WAC had swelled to 16, and under the cover of darkness, the Airport Five met at Denver International Airport to plot their escape route. They lured three more to defect the WAC and would form the Mountain West. Come 2010, the art of scheming behind the scenes resurfaced with the WAC's The Project until the Mountain West foiled it and got Nevada and Fresno State to flip. Fast forward to 2022 when USC and UCLA sent an earthquake through the college athletics landscape, leading to a drawn-out one-year soap opera that culminated in the Pac-12 falling apart and schools scattering to the Big Ten, Big 12, and ACC, while court battles ensued. And now 2024, where the Pac-2 have lured five from the Mountain West. The generations have passed and the people at these schools have changed, but the century-long tradition of schools jockeying for position and leaving friends behind has not. And after all the carnage, we were left with a Pac-7 and a Mountain West 7. I'm not going to go through all the events, who turned down who, poaching penalties, exit fees, all that, because that would be rehashing what you've read or heard 800 times already anyway. Instead, I'm going to gloss over the budgets and tenure Sagarin, and what I really want to do is deep dive into the TV ratings. Using the Sportico database for athletic budgets, obviously you have San Diego State with a monster $96 million athletic budget. 5 Pac-7 schools were in the top 8 in the Mountain West for athletic budgets. However, note that Hawaii at $52.7 million was only 1 to 1.3 million above Fresno and Utah State. And travel expenses might account for that full 1 to 1.3 million. So I speculate that once you isolate those travel expenses, that Fresno and Utah State would both shift into the top 7. If that is indeed the case, then the top 7 athletic budgets in the Mountain West, 5 of them would be departing to the Pac-12, while the other 2 were pursued but elected to remain with the Mountain West. Looking at football budgets, your top 4 are Colorado State, Boise State, Utah State, and San Diego State, all who moved. In 5th was UNLV, who was pursued but elected to stay put, and in 6th was Fresno State, who did move. For tenure Sagarin, Boise was 1st, being 28th nationally, AFA was 2nd at 57th, San Diego State 3rd at 64th, Fresno 4th at 79th, Utah State 5th at 81st, Wyoming 6th at 88th, and Colorado State 7th at 98th. Those were the 7 who were in the top 100 for tenure Sagarin. Now we're going to deep dive into TV viewership, and we'll circle back to this chart at the end. This spreadsheet tracks every Nielsen-rated game in Mountain West Conference regular season play for 11 years from 2013 through 2023 on 6 networks: CBS, Fox, FS1, ESPN, ESPN2, and ESPNU. Obviously no out-of-conference games or no conference championship games because we want to keep it apples to apples. Note that the total row is weighted or adjusted for the percentage of each team sample on each network. Obvious stuff, but the clarification is necessary. Also note that Fox only had a 1-game sample, a Fresno-Wyoming game. So Fox is only listed for Fresno and Wyoming. So Fresno and Wyoming have an additional row with Fox while everyone else does not. Now the best way to summarize this spreadsheet is it attacks ratings from 3 different angles. The first method is in yellow on the left, and it's the most simple method. It is merely taking what each school averaged on each network. The average viewers are based on millions, So if it says Boise State on ESPN2 has 0.568, that means that Boise State had 568,000 viewers on average on the Deuce. The sample column is obviously how many Nielsen-rated games each school had on each network. The opponent's average on network column is what the opponent, how many viewers on the network they had, divided by their number of games on that network. And that is provided as needed context. Because if you want to know where a school ranked and how many viewers they averaged, then you should also know how many viewers their opponents averaged on a per network basis. For example, Utah State was third in average viewership, but they were second in their opponent's average viewership. So could their opponents have helped them? And on the flip side, Air Force was fifth in average viewership, but they were 10th in their opponent's average viewership. So could Air Force's ratings have been dragged down? Now the second method, and we're going to jump all the way to the right-hand side of the spreadsheet, and that's going to calculate how each school fared compared to the Mountain West average on that network. So that first column is the Mountain West average on the network. So that would be the average of all Mountain West Conference games on that network. The second column would be the over-under plus minus compared to the Mountain West average on the network. So for example, it says 0.101 for Boise State. That means Boise State averaged 101,000 more viewers than what a Mountain West game usually got on a per network basis. The formulas are at the top, and the formula for that first yellow column would be a school's average viewers on a network minus the Mountain West average viewers on a network. So it's pure addition, subtraction, and then to the right of that column would be the ranking. Now, I believe a percentage of viewers is a better measurement than doing basic addition, subtraction. So the next column over is going to be the over-under percentage compared to the Mountain West average on the network. So the formula for that, instead of subtracting, instead you're dividing. And if you were exactly 1.000, that would mean that you were even with the Mountain West average. If you were above 1.000, that would mean that you scored above the Mountain West average. And if you were below 1.00, that would mean you scored below the Mountain West average. And the column to the right, which would be the second to last yellow column, that translates that number into a percentage. So Boise State would average 18.2% more viewers than the Mountain West average on a per network basis. The final column would obviously rank everyone by that metric. Now the third method, which is my preferred method, is how a school compares, or the over-under, to their opponent's average on that same network. In yellow, we have over-under plus minus to the opponent's average on the network. So that formula is just your average viewers on a network, then subtracting the opponent's average viewers on a network. In Boise State, for example, having 0.084, that would mean that they had, on average, 84,000 more viewers than what their opponents would average on the same network. Yellow column to the right would then rank everyone on that basis. And now the green columns, which is how I would prefer to measure all the schools ratings-wise, is doing an over-under percentage. So it's taking a school's average viewers on a network and then dividing it, not subtracting, they're dividing it by the opponent's average viewers on that same network. Once again, 1.000 would mean that you're even with your opponent's average on the network. Above 1 would mean you're scoring above your opponent's average on the network. Below 1 would mean you're scoring below your opponent's average on the network. In the second green column, we'll convert that into a percentage. So for example, Boise State would average 14.8% above their opponent's average when playing on the same network. Now this spreadsheet goes all the way down to include all 12 Mountain West schools. And then if we scroll to the right, it will show every game for every team on a per network basis. So first it would show the rating, it went in chronological order, then it would show the opponent, then the opponent's average on that network, then how that school compared to their opponent's average on that network. So the rating for that game minus their opponent's network average, then the Mountain West network average, and then how that rating for that specific game compared over under to the Mountain West network average. And that process would repeat for every game. Now the biggest finding was that some schools, their ranking in their average viewership could differ by quite a bit compared to their ranking in their over under the Mountain West average on a network basis, or their over under to the opponent's average on a network basis. For example, Utah State was third in average viewership, but having the second highest opponent's average indicated that their placements could flip a bit in the other metrics. So if we go all the way to the right into the over-under percentage compared to the Mountain West average on a per network basis, Utah State was 10th. And then if we go to the green columns, the right-hand green column, the over-under percentage compared to your opponent's average on that network, Utah State was 10th. Another school you could see variation on was Air Force. Air Force ranked 5th in average viewership, but if you go all the way to the right-hand yellow column, over-under percentage compared to the Mountain West average on a per network basis, Air Force was 2nd. And then if you go to the green columns, the rightmost green column, the over-under percentage compared to your opponent's average on that same network, Air Force once again was 2nd. One argument people might make is that if a school could be 3rd in average viewership, but then 10th in their over-under percentage to the opponent's average on their network, that would indicate that many of these schools are tightly packed together for someone to fall from 3rd to 10th. And if you subscribe to that belief, then that would mean, with the exception of Boise State, that the difference in TV value between a lot of these schools might not be all that much. Now, given this page is huge and you can't even see all the schools on it, let's move to the rankings tab where everything is condensed and you can see everyone easier. Here you have the rankings for average viewership and then your opponent's average viewership on a per network basis, and then the over-under compared to your opponent's average on the network, both plus minus in percentage. And then last, your over-under compared to the Mountain West average on the network, both plus minus in percentage. I've put my preferred metric in green, but the other metrics are in yellow. Your opponent's average is in white because that's not something that any school has control over. Boise State ran the table, finishing 1st in every category. Air Force came in 2nd in all the metrics where you either isolated the network or you isolated both the opponent and network. Fresno State was also 3rd in any metric where you either isolated the network or isolated both the opponent and network. After that, San Diego State was 4th in their over-under on a percentage basis to the opponent's average on the same network. And those 4 schools, Boise State, Air Force, Fresno, and San Diego State, were the only 4 schools that rated higher than what their opponents rated in terms of their average on the same network. Colorado State was in 5th, close to even at only minus 2.2%. UNLV, despite many years as a bottom feeder, still came in 6th at only negative 6.1%. Wyoming came in 7th. And then Hawaii, New Mexico, Utah State, San Jose State, Nevada, all pretty tightly packed together. And this chart has both combinations for every game. So you have the team listed to the left and then their opponent to the right, and then it ranks the team against their opponent. So that means each game would be listed twice with both iterations of the team against the opponent. And the column on the right would be how that game ranked against the opponent's average on the network. And this will continue for all the teams. Each game is plotted here. And you'll see at the top for each team how many games or and what percentage were in the top 20%, second 20%, middle 20%, bottom 40%, bottom 20%. And now we make that simpler by finally moving to the over-under to the opponent's average on the network summary tab. And this has all those same games, but it's condensed for everyone onto one sheet. In the top row, that over-under percentage compared to the opponent's average on that network, that is what I personally value the most. And Boise State was 14.8% above their opponent's average on the network, Air Force 11.5% above, Fresno State 5.7% above, and San Diego State 2.9% above. The second row, over-under plus minus, is just basic subtraction. It's what you averaged on that network minus what your opponent averaged on that network. Now we're going to look at 3 scatter plots using those 3 methods. The first method being just your simple average viewers. And how the scatter plot works is going from left to right is the size of your sample. So it goes up to 45 games, which was the most. That was by Boise State. That's why they're nearly off the graph entirely. And then bottom to top was your average viewership in Nielsen rated Mount West regular season games on CBS, Fox, FS1, ESPN, ESPN2, or ESPNU from 2013 through 2023. Obviously, Boise was the highest, and then they were followed by Fresno, Utah State, and San Diego State. And you can see a lot of those schools tightly packed together. Now, the next scatter plot is our second method. That is your over-under on a percentage basis to the Mount West average on that same network. Once again, Boise State in the upper right is nearly off the graph entirely. Air Force was second best here, and Fresno was third best. And then you have Colorado State ranking high in viewership, but their sample size was small, while San Diego State and Wyoming had a higher sample size, which might have lowered their average viewership a little bit. Same story with Utah State. And finally, the third method, my favorite, your over-under percentage to the opponent's average on that same network. Boise State in the upper right, first place by a wide margin. Then you have Air Force in second, followed by Fresno and San Diego State, who were very close together in third and fourth. Colorado State was fifth, but smaller sample size. Wyoming and Utah State had larger sample sizes, which might have lowered their averages a little bit. So circling back to that chart at the beginning, here it is filled out with everyone's rankings and average viewership, followed by their over-under percentage to the Mount West average on the network, and finally their over-under percentage to the opponent's average on the network. You have Boise State, who was first in all three categories. Fresno State was second, third. Air Force, who was remaining in the Mount West, was fifth, second. UNLV, while 11th in average viewership, was then fifth and sixth once you went deeper into the metrics. San Diego State was top four in two of the metrics. All of this with the caveat that with the high volume of games the Mount West has on CBS Sports Network, which is not Nielsen rated, we are limited in what data we have to work with. But all we can do is try our best with what data is available, and now we await for what chaos is next on the Western Front.